Previously, in Hedge Knights, Madsy started excavating an underground room to use in case of emergencies. The Adlets worked to expand the farmland to accommodate a wider variety of crops. Sappho and Lazarus sowed the seeds early, hoping frost wouldn't kill off the saplings. And then they celebrated the spring advent together, launching lanterns high into the sky. Episode 31, Like a Thief. The ceremony had wrapped up, and Klein mentioned that he had never seen lanterns before, and asked the other Adlets if they were worried that it would attract visitors raiding their keep. Megoof explained that it had never happened like that, and if they did, well, they certainly knew how to defend themselves. While breaking bread around the table, Sappho and Lazarus requested everyone's help once again to clear even more space in the farm, working south towards the curtain wall. Megoof told Sappho he'd be happy to take over more of the cooking duties, as there was only really baking bread left to do anyway. Sappho and Lazarus knew they all needed more medicine. Their stockpiles had been considerably depleted between distilling hybrid extract and tending Klein's blood rot, which he only just recovered from. Additionally, they were running low on traveling provisions and would need to sow a field of maki, and also a field of flax as well. Wool wasn't suitable for all the clothing needs they had, and there was no telling the gossypium or double strand would survive until harvest. Judea asked Megahoof if he thought the meat he had butchered from the strange feral creatures would last long enough to be dried, and he worried it might spoil before the last batch finished. She told him she'd whip up a new rack. It would only take an hour or two. While heading out to inspect the progress on the boundary wall, Megahoof noticed some timber that was accidentally left in the marsh and grabbed it to head back to the keep. He was pleased with the progress. It would only take another month or so before the walls were complete. While most of the Glade members slept, Arauco planned and packed for his departure. He only told Megahoof of his desire to part ways, and was fairly certain Megahoof kept his word and told nobody else. He hadn't formally asked what he could take with him for all of his work on the keep, but he longed for meat, so he chose to pack as much dried meat from the larder as he could. He grabbed a few spare pieces of clothing and lined his pack with silver and a bedroll as well. He moved through the keep casually to avoid any questions or suspicion. He wanted to leave without having to say farewell. He finished packing and headed out of the southern gate as if he was working on the boundary wall, hiding his provisions and bedroll as if they were timber for the piers. Beside him was a bleary-eyed Tangier, only having just awoke, and not yet aware that Arauco's bundle of timber was actually a bedroll stuffed with dry meat and clothing. He split ways from Tangier without a word, and ventured off into the world in the dark and alone, like a thief in the night. He arrived skulking around the gatehouse, catching the guard unaware, and departed very much in the same manner. The other night owls continued working on the walls, chilled by the sudden drop in temperature. Lazarus and Sappho worried that they had gambled with nature and sown their seeds too soon in the season. Only time would tell if their industriousness was poorly timed. When day broke, Megahoof noticed Arauco's absence, even when nobody else had, as he knew Arauco planned to depart at the start of spring. He called a meeting around the dining room table to explain the situation. He explained that Arauco had made the choice to leave the community and informed him of his choice a few months back, but was sworn to secrecy. Megahoof made it clear he didn't understand Arauco's reasons or motivation, as that wasn't something Arauco had shared, only that he had planned to leave at the start of spring, and didn't want anyone else to know. The others had many questions, but none was met with satisfying answers. The community felt as if they had somehow failed Arauco. That is, everyone except Madzi. She was not fond of him and was happy he had left. The meeting adjourned, leaving most of the Adlets disheartened. They returned to work, confused by the news, wondering where he might have gone, or why he chose to leave. Still in a state of shock about Arauco, they were ripped back to reality. Monsters were mustering north of the wall, readying themselves for an attack. Alarms were sounded to ready the defense. Megahoof called for all of the archers to rally up north, while the children of the keep sequestered inside. Their boundary wall had made it difficult for the raiders to attack, as they were traversing around its perimeter. The Adlets waited at one of the gaps in the walls, just beyond the marsh, to strike as they arrived. While the archers laid in wait to volley towards the raiders, Lazarus prepared the keep's defense by shutting all of the slab doors. Megahoof directed the other archers to aim at any raider with a bow. Only a few had bows, but their bows were more powerful with better range. Madzi was hit with a glancing blow from an arrow, and Megahoof called for everyone to disengage while attempting to lure the archers further from their raid party. The raiders were clearly waiting for something. They were mustered but not attacking. Megahoof was worried they were waiting for more siege weapon supplies, so he thought it was important to skirmish with the raiders despite the risk of injury, as allowing the raiders to successfully construct siege equipment would be catastrophic. Sapo tried to quickly tend the wounds of Madzi and Sapo between volley engagements. It was difficult for Klein to fight outside the keep, unable to dodge and weave like the other Adlets who were decades his junior. The hit-and-run tactics were working, and the strength of the enemy's resolve was wavering. While the visitors' tactics were haphazard at best, they were hulking, stout, and tough, able to remain standing while being shot by many more arrows than an adlet could ever withstand. And even more dangerously, they could easily outrun all but the fastest adlets, even in full armor, so straying too far from the keep's gates could be fatal. It was unusual for the visitors to not engage even after many volleys of arrows and multiple of their own dead. Megahoof worried that this was some sort of ploy to lure the adlets out of the keep, to attack from another direction or ambush their own party, but knew Lazarus would be on the lookout and would alert them at first sight of a second party. Megahoof called the all clear for the adlets to retreat back to the keep, as it seemed the raid party was disengaging. The archers were stressed, fatigued, and stricken with exposure symptoms after a long day of battle in the deep plagued marshes. While the adlets were exhausted after the prolonged skirmishing in the fields, most found that it was difficult to sleep. Raids were always unnerving, but the raids lately seemed to be different, like they were scheming or planning, which was quite the divergence from the blitzing, bloodthirsty berserkers they were used to. As chilling as berserkers were, scheming visitors were far more distressing. Heavy snow started to fall on the keep, a deeply concerning weather pattern for the farmers, as all of the seedlings would be exposed to the frozen temperatures. While there wasn't anything to do about snow falling on the farm, it would probably be best to harvest all of the ripe ambrosia soon. Leaving it any longer would be too risky. First thing in the morning, Sappho got to work, harvesting all of the ripe ambrosia. Klein was in bed, recovering from his wounds. Megahoof chatted with the other squires about possibly keeping Klein in the merlins on the wall instead of out in the field in future raids. As helpful as it was to have another archer, they were worried he was more of a liability in the field than an asset. It might also help to have a second pair of eyes just in case Lazarus failed to notice additional raiders. Everyone agreed it would be best to keep him in the keep. The trick now would be to gently let him know their decision without offending him. Tangier volunteered for the task, but decided to allow him to fully recover first, so as to not add insult upon injury. Thankfully, the snow squall had passed without claiming any of their seeds or saplings. The Glade members worked to clean the pollution under the deep snows that were melting. Klein had fully recovered, both from his arrow wounds and blood plague. He was in the best shape since he first met the squires. Tangier pulled him aside and asked him whether or not he enjoyed being out in the field during raids and sieges. He explained that it was difficult for him to hear commands and instructions over the clamorous clang of battle. Tangier asked if it would be easier for him to act as a lookout within the keep's walls, and Klein said it would certainly be easier, but he also added he was worried that the others wouldn't think he was contributing enough to the defense of their home. Klein assured him that it would be more than enough. If he didn't want to fight at all, that too would be fine. That put Klein at ease. He was never much of a fighter and had only managed to land an arrow or two in the past few battles anyway. Progress clearing more fields for farming had slowed, and Sapo and Lazarus worried they had missed the window to sow certain seeds this season, like more devil strand, which takes quite a long time to grow and dies in the winter. At least the seeds and saplings seemed to survive the cold snap and snow, so there was at least some good news. Most of the adlets were so busy cleaning one small plot at a time, it was easy to fail to notice how lush and green and pure the curtain walls gardens were becoming. The salix trees had purified about half of the remaining lichen-rich soil to the southwest, and the farmers were cleaning the southern plots by hand. Although it wasn't possible to see the soil beyond the boundary wall from the keep, anyone working out on the wall would notice the boundary trees were cleaning the soil out there as well, and acting as a perfect buffer against smog and encroaching blight. As soon as the fields were purified of pollution, they'd till and sow immediately, hoping there was enough time for the double strand caps to mature. Sapo and Meguhoof discussed replanting 2 of the salix trees out towards the boundary wall. Sapo's last attempt to create a tight root ball had worked. The tree he had moved towards the north was thriving. Meguhoof said it seemed like a good idea, especially if the soil was cleaned by hand anyway. So Sapo planned on root balling 2 more trees, and then using some bison to sledge them out towards the edge of the glade. It took careful planning and measurements to make sure each tree was evenly spaced out to ensure maximum coverage. The measurements needed to be taken before trees were dug up into root balls, as any delay upon replanting could kill the tree, as they were particularly fragile to uprooting, unlike their gray pine cousins. Sapo needed to have the sledge repaired. It was damaged from the last time it was used, so Lazarus and Judea quickly patched it as best as they could, using some new forged nails and fresh sturdy timber. The bison were eager to haul and pull. They clearly yearned for green pastures, despite having never experienced any beyond the small glades they were brought when fetching additional salix trees. Megahoof and Lazarus said they'd leave it up to Sapo where he wanted to bring the last Salix tree. Each cardinal direction now had 3 trees, so he'd be adding a 4th somewhere. Sapo figured he was closest to the eastern wall, and daylight was fast fading, so he quickly measured and sledged the tree eastward. Sapo joked that they now had 13 trees surrounding their glade, an unlucky omen for some adlets. Dave rolled his eyes and then asked Sapo, "Oh, by the way, what is your astrological sign?" Sapo laughed and crudely gestured using his fingers. The two had a hearty belly laugh together and nearly woke some of the other sleeping adlets. Except for the expansive southeastern marsh that needed a significant amount of piers and bridge work, most of the boundary wall was completed, save for some small unfinished sections. The entire perimeter was walkable, and they hoped that would discourage raiders from breaching sections. It would only be a matter of weeks until the project was completed, allowing the adlets to tackle new goals the community decided upon. They wanted to go adventuring for ruins, but needed better clothing to survive the trip, so that quest was stalled until Klein had his Gossapium on hand. The farmers were eager to start planting additional Hirut and Maki. Both crops matured slowly, and the Maki was needed for their quest to the ruins. Normally the adlets waited until nicely planned plots were purified and tilled, but the farmers were impatient and urged everyone to clean and till as soon as they could, so they could sow all the seeds they had in stock. The majority of the curtain grounds were cleared of pollution. It wasn't an unrealistic goal to have the entire area purified by summer's end. The hybrid extract was a miraculous concoction, and what the adlets had accomplished in one short year was nearly unthinkable. For centuries, most of the adlets barely scraped by as little more than scavengers, hunters, and gatherers, sending their civilization and culture back to nearly the Stone Age, living in caves. All it took was a few careful archivists to preserve much of the knowledge of the sciences of the High Kingdoms for the squires to claw their way back to a state of proper civility, living in warm timber and slate rooms and in a grand castle keep. Klein's previous home of Pennacook was little more than a network of caves, and his childhood home was just a small cottage on a remote island. All the other settlements that Dave knew were similar to Pennacook, either squatting in ruins or living underground. What the adlets had accomplished was unprecedented, but without sharing their secrets with the world, too few would benefit from their progress. Thank you for watching episode 31 of Hedge Knights, Like a Thief. If you have any feedback for me, let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to support me as a content creator, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing this content with your friends, or even becoming a Patreon patron. A link to that can be found in the description. Thank you so very much for watching, and a special thank you to everybody that supports me. I hope to catch you next episode. Farewell, my fellow adlets.